So welcome everyone to the Living Well with Cancer series hosted by the Cancer Resource Center. Today we have a Living Well with Cancer Advanced Care Planning presented by Hospicare, Edna Brown. So welcome Edna. And Lucia, welcome.
And there's Dr. Yander joining us. Thanks so much, Dr. Yander. Welcome. So as I said to a few people who were here early, Dr. Yander and I did a lot of these advanced care planning and other workshops during COVID, and I really enjoy sharing that time with her. And so we'll do a really brief overview. I think I'll do that if you don't mind, Dr. Yander, and then I'll let you do some of the advanced care planning. So, but I do love talking about advanced care planning, and actually did another workshop in Cortland today. So we do I will do it super briefly. There I am, COVID picture. We'll talk real briefly about Hospicare, just in case some of you don't know. We started in 1983. It says there Hospicare was incorporated as a not-for-profit. So we are celebrating our 40th year this year. And in 95, we actually had the 6-bed facility up on King Road built, and that's the first freestanding hospice residence in New York State. And then in 2014, we started serving Cortland County as well. I'm going to go just to what is Hospicare for those of you who might not know. It's specialized end-of-life care. We try to take care of people in a physical, emotional, social, and spiritual way. We really focus a lot on symptom management and pain management, because to be on hospice, people have given up interventions. They're not doing anything to change the course of their disease progression, but we do really focus on symptom and pain management. And really the patient is the star of the show and driving the bus and telling us where they want to go. So we really want to do what our patient or what their healthcare proxy wants us to do. And yeah, when people choose hospice, they're provided with support and tools to remain in the home environment if they want to. But hospice takes place lots of different places. There's another slide, but I'll say home, skilled nursing facility, assisted living facility, a loved one's home, and then also at our residence. And this is our interdisciplinary team. So anyone who does sign on to hospice has all these people. You see patient and family in the middle there, but we keep in contact with the primary physician. Dr. Yander's our medical director. I'm one of the 2 social workers. So I work with people on specific resources that they're looking for, trying to connect them with things, but also listening to both the patient and the family and helping them solve any issues. We have spiritual care coordinators. Grief support is provided, both pre-bereavement and post-bereavement services. And we have volunteers that actually come into the home and will sit with a patient while a family member needs to go out, or maybe they'll do some things like gardening or a light housekeeping or something like that for the family. Everyone has a primary nurse back there at the top. They're the case manager. If we are able to provide some personal care in the home, we use our home health aides, and they can do up to 1 hour a day, 5 days a week in someone's home if they need bathing and help with personal care. But after hours, when this whole team is off the clock, we do have an answering service and on-call nurses that will both answer questions and also go and visit a patient and family in the middle of the night if they need to. And we're supported by our excellent admin staff. I said that's where we're all cared for. And so we never miss an opportunity to try to educate people about Hospicare. And again, we do a lot of grief support. We were just talking with Bert recently about this. People who pass away on hospice services, who die on hospice, their loved ones can get individual grief counseling, join support groups. We have some expressive arts and educational grief workshops. Sometimes we might do pottery or metal smithing and grief, yoga and grief, self-massage and grief. There are events for kids and teens, and we often have community memorials. One of them is called, oh, now I'm missing it. My dog's over here making noise, excuse me. we light luminaries around the Hospicare grounds, illuminations, and have a community memorial for folks. And then for those who pass on hospice services, we have supportive mailings that go out for 13 months after someone has died on our service. We also do offer a limited amount of grief support for people just who don't have someone who has died on hospice, but have some grief or loss that they're working with. And so we have 6 sessions of bereavement counseling for them if they contact us. So again, we never pass up an opportunity to talk about Hospicare, and also to say that, you know, if in doubt, we often say, refer someone early, refer yourself early, refer a family member early, so we can have lots of time to care for you or your loved one. So now we can start with advanced care planning, and Dr. Yander, you can unmute. And if you want to take the first few slides, we can then maybe jump back and forth.
Sure. I always like to talk to people at advanced care planning when, you know, I'm also a primary care physician in a community, you know, so when people come in for their physicals or when there is a major change in their health status. And so at least once a year, or if something substantial happens. And I think it's good to put it in a context of where are you now in terms of your life trajectory, in terms of your illness trajectory. And it's a very different conversation for, you know, younger, healthy people, and very different conversation for people who are likely going to be facing some serious challenges health-wise coming down. And I like to remind people that it's not morbid to talk about this. It's a very practical issue. And if you don't voice your opinions, you're making a selection, you know, you're voting the default, which may not be in your best interest. I think at least everybody should have a healthcare proxy. A healthcare proxy is a person who would speak on your behalf if you cannot express your opinions. And depending,
Sure.
people need medical orders for life-sustaining treatments.
All right, I'm going to roll up chat
Yeah.
so you can see this, what a healthcare proxy is.
So it is a legal document. And if you don't name a healthcare proxy, New York State family law has a list of surrogates. It's your spouse if you're married. A healthcare proxy is especially important for people who are not married or live in partnerships that are not legally recognized, because you would assume that the person that you're living with could be a healthcare proxy, but not unless you're married. And then it sort of goes down the list, you know, siblings, parents. What I always tell people, choose a healthcare proxy carefully and wisely. It should be somebody that you know, that you trust, but also somebody that's going to be able to make a potentially very difficult decision. And occasionally people don't choose their spouse because they say, I don't want to put this burden on my spouse, or they say, my spouse would not be able to function in that kind of role. Healthcare proxy only comes into place when you cannot speak on your behalf. So this is somebody who speaks on your behalf. And it is important to name the healthcare proxy, fill out the paperwork, but also have a conversation with them. You need to tell them what you want in sort of broad strokes, because otherwise it's very difficult for people to make decisions if they don't know what you want. Anything to add, Edna, about healthcare proxies?
I was just going to say at the end here, I can put in the chat. I can't do it right now because I'm sharing my screen, but I can put in the link. If you haven't done a healthcare proxy, you can just Google New York State healthcare proxy, and they've got the form. Super simple to fill out, requires 2 witnesses. The requirements are pretty slim. You have to be older than 18, and it cannot be one of your medical professionals. I know Dr. Yanners probably had people say, would you be my healthcare proxy? You know what I want, but your physician cannot be, but anyone over 18. And as Dr. Yanders said, if you don't choose, then someone will be chosen for you, and it goes in a particular order in the state. And maybe you don't want your brother or sister being your healthcare proxy, or maybe you don't want your adult child to be your healthcare proxy. So it's great to name it. And all of these documents we're going to talk about are dynamic. At one point, my partner, my spouse was my healthcare proxy. When we divorced, my friend was my healthcare proxy. And now my children are old enough, they're young adults, and they're serving as my healthcare proxy. So, you know, it can change. You can change your mind as situations change in your life.
You don't need a
There's a
lawyer
pic-
to, yeah. I just want to always point out, you don't need a lawyer to fill out a healthcare proxy. It needs to be signed by 2 witnesses. You know, what we do in the primary care office, you know, if you don't have a healthcare proxy, I'm going to hand you to sign one. And it could be our nurse and our receptionist, 2 witnesses. You know, really what the document says, you naming somebody who would make decisions in your behalf if you're unable to express yourself. That's really all that healthcare proxy does. But it's really important to have somebody that you trust, that knows your opinions, and that's going to be able to function in that role when difficult decision may need to be made.
And, you know, we talk often about how different family members may have different skills, or maybe friends have different skills and different roles to play. My mom had 5 children and she lived with my sister. My sister was the perfect caregiver for her. My sister could not be the healthcare proxy because my mother didn't want any interventions. And so that was too emotional a burden for my sister. So my mother, you know, handed that healthcare proxy hat over to me. And so you want someone who's going to follow your wishes and not be too emotionally burdened by those. And that's why I think Dr. Yanner says sometimes it's easier for a spouse not to be, because it's tough to make those decisions, even if that's what your spouse or your loved one told you they wanted. So when I put this link in there, there are also maybe like 6 or 8 pages of kind of talking through who can you choose for a healthcare proxy. All right. How about the MOLST, Dr. Yander?
The MOLST is a form that ideally you fill out with your physician or with somebody that, you know, a medical provider that you have known for a while, that knows about your medical situation. And again, it should be filled out in the realm of what are your goals of care? What are you hoping to accomplish? Where are you in your medical trajectory? It is also a living document. You can always change your MOLST form. But it really should be thought of as medical order. It has a legal value. If you fill out a MOLST form, and if you say in your MOLST form, I do not wish to be resuscitated, the order is supposed to follow you. And if you change settings, let's say you show up in the emergency room, in the ICU, in the hospital, the MOLST form is supposed to be honored. You know, the new providers, if you have the MOLST available, will bring it up and they will ask you, is this still what you want? Or they will ask your healthcare proxy, is this still what you consider to be appropriate? But it has sort of kind of a higher level of value than just telling your healthcare proxy, I don't want to be resuscitated. You know, it's a medical order that's supposed to be followed. And you know, it's a shocking
real
color. I can lift one here. It looks like this. It's a shocking pink that people know about it, and it has several pages. And you know, the first page talks about resuscitation. The second page talks about many other healthcare decisions that may be appropriate as you know, people are getting sicker. The way I talk to people about resuscitation, you know, when we resuscitate somebody, the person does not have a pulse, and so their heart has stopped and their respiration has stopped. So the person has already died. And I'm very frank and blunt about it, that we understand what we're hoping to accomplish. So this person has already died. We're trying to bring them back by doing chest compressions and, you know, breathing. One way to look at resuscitation is, do you want to allow for natural death? Or do you want to try means of trying to come back? And I think it is important to have a really frank discussion about this. If you look at the outcomes of attempted resuscitation, they're not particularly good for most older people who are ill. It works on TV, it works on a screen. It doesn't really work that well in regular life. And the people who are healthier and sort of better off before the resuscitation attempt tend to do better. So if you fish a kid out of the pond because they're drowning and you're trying to resuscitate them, the outcomes tend to be much better than, resuscitation when older person in a hospital with multiple medical conditions. So the data says about, 15% of people were able to bring back their pulse and about 2% make it to hospital discharge. So sometimes I tell people, you're not really giving up anything all that useful. Think about it that way. So that's the first page, chest compressions, resuscitation. The second page, again, everything should be put together in the realms of where are you in your life trajectory? How aggressive interventions do you want? Do you want full press, ICU, cath lab, everything? Do you want limited interventions, meaning the team will talk to you about what the options are and you can pick and choose? Or do you want comfort care? Comfort care is appropriate for people who are signing up with hospice, people who have terminal illness who are dying. For young, healthy people, unlimited intervention makes sense. For people who are facing serious medical problems, I think the limited interventions are the most appropriate because there is a discussion before things happen by default. The other pieces of the MOLST form talk about artificial nutrition hydration. Do you want IV fluids? Do you want a feeding tube? Do you want dialysis? Do you want transfusions? Do you want to go back to the hospital? So I actually think that the second page of the MOLST form, when you're kind of discussing in more granular details the different interventions, is very useful because it kind of focuses people on these are all the kind of interventions that we have, and ideally think about them before you forced a choice. I remind people about feeding tubes and advanced dementia. We have information that feeding tubes in advanced dementia do not extend life, do not prevent weight loss, and do not prevent pressure sores. So, the American Geriatric Society actually explicitly recommends against placing feeding tubes in advanced dementia. Feeding tubes are a emotionally difficult decision for people. How can you not feed somebody? But feeding someone and having a feeding tube put in are two very different options.
Yeah,
Any questions or comments, Edna?
Well, I'll make my comment and then I'll pause and be quiet for a little bit. But again, this is a dynamic document, right? I'm 61, healthy as far as I know. I really want to have grandchildren. My healthcare proxies have been told to pull out all the stops because I really want to live long enough to see grandkids. But if I'm 95 and I have 5 comorbidities and I get a terminal diagnosis, I would change my mind about the things that I wanted on this form. So as Dr. Yander said, it's really where you are in your life. And if you have a disease that's responding to treatment, then you'd want to go with that. If you find that, you don't have any more treatment options and you want to choose comfort measures, you can do that. And I do like this form because sometimes it says, I'll do a trial of something. And then that way you and your doctor or your healthcare proxy and your doctor can decide, is that working or not for you? And then move on. Do any of you guys have questions? We could save them for the end. Okay, we'll keep going. We'll have lots of time at the end for questions. Now, Dr. Yander, this is a separate order, right? That someone would have if they didn't have a MOLST.
Well, so the MOLST, the first page of the MOLST talks about resuscitation. And sometimes people don't want to fill out the whole MOLST form and go through the second page, so they can elect just to have a do not resuscitate order, which really applies to you have already crossed the threshold, your heart doesn't beat, you don't breathe, and now we try to bring you back with chest compressions, and then when you make it to the hospital with all kinds of array of other interventions, how to restart people's heartbeats. So you can have a freestanding do not resuscitate order outside of the MOLST form.
Great. There it is. It's also very, very simple, and usually you can get it at your doctor's office.
Yeah.
All right.
So it needs to be signed by a doctor for the ambulance to reflect on it. in order, it's a medical order. So for the ambulance people to reflect on it, it has to be signed by your physician. Just that you have, your partner say, well, they don't want to be resuscitated. That does not hold legal value for ambulance crews. You need a piece of paper.
So they need this signed by their doctor at home, available for their partner to share with EMTs if they were called, or to find on the fridge. I think most of you have probably heard that lots of people keep their documents of importance on the fridge because EMS are trained to kind of come in and look there if you're at home. Okay, so those are the medical documents. I could talk a little bit about the legal and financial decisions. And again, this is part of advanced care planning. I do want to share one quote. I just did something called Aging Mastery that Lifelong is offering at McGraw House. And in a video, the gentleman said, end of life planning should not be done at the end of life. And I thought, that's so excellent, right? At the end of life, we don't want to be forced to make decisions really quickly, right? So now is the perfect time to start making plans because we don't know when our end of life is. And I thought that was something I was going to borrow and use. So, and that's true not only of the medical decisions, but the legal and financial decisions. So I always say I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a financial planner, but we do know that people should have a power of attorney if you want to name someone to make financial decisions for you when you can't do so. So that's important in that, like, let's say one of you is ill and is unconscious and can't pay their bills. The person with the durable power of attorney could pay bills for the person who could not financially do that. They could also make decisions. They could apply for Medicaid for the person if they needed that for extended care in a facility. So it's important to have power of attorney, to give that to someone, again, someone you trust to make financial decisions for you. If someone in your family is struggling with financial problems or addictions or mental illness, those are not the people you want to choose for your power of attorney. You want to find someone who is comfortable and you're comfortable and trust them to make financial decisions for you. A will should be drawn up with a lawyer. There are some things you can do online. I'm not sure how valid they are, but often sometimes people get a template and fill it out and then take it to a lawyer, trying to save some time. But it indicates how your assets and estate are going to be divided. And so you name someone, as you all probably know, the executor, who's going to be responsible for making sure all those decisions are met. And you can also specify care of minors, if you have children who are under 18, what gifts you want to make to loved ones or charities, and you can also specify funeral and burial arrangements. And then the last thing I don't know as much about, but it's a living trust, where it's going to be you put your estate into a trust and appoint someone who's going to take care of those things and disperse funds to different beneficiaries. So I really would, we have lots of great lawyers in town. I recommend, if you don't have these things drawn up, that you think about them. Again, think about the people in your life that could support you in this, and who has the type of skills and personality and willingness to be an executor, to be a power of attorney, or to administer a trust for you.
I could add to the will. We have seen situations. So if you die without a will, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but your estate goes to a probate court, and it could take several months for things to kind of run their way through the probate court. And in the meantime, nobody can manipulate with the finances. And so what we have seen occasionally, if somebody dies in the family, the other part of the couple may be incapacitated, and suddenly there's no kind of practical way how to pay bills. So I think will is a really important thing to do, because you don't want to have your financial stuff tied up in probate court and leave people in a limbo in the meantime. That's especially applicable to as people age, and you may need significant financial outlays for elder care or something like that. So there's a default if you die without a will, but the default may not go in your favor.
Right.
In
Exactly.
terms of time.
Yeah, and you can talk with your lawyer too. Like my daughters would end up being the recipients of what little I would have left. And sometimes people actually put their spouse or their children or whomever on their accounts with them, or have a transfer at the time of death set up on certain accounts so that they would go directly to the person. But yeah, if you can avoid probate and the lengthiness of that, that's a good thing. So talk to your lawyer about that. Do you want to talk about this, or want me to, Dr. Yander?
You can talk about it. Sure.
So I did a lot of research when I first came to Hospicare about organ, eye, and tissue donation. And so most people, organ donation is more difficult than it would seem, because when we have people on hospice, they're not intubated, they're not on machines keeping them alive, so there's no ability to donate organs. And as we age or have disease, we're less likely to be a candidate for organ donation. So for instance, eyes, the cornea are a great donation for people to make and fairly easy, but they don't want eyes older than 70. So I think they're not discriminating. They're just looking for the best cornea and eye that they can get. If you have certain diseases, you can't donate organ and tissue. So you can go to and just Google Finger Lakes tissue, and I think it's bone donation. Tissue and I'm sorry, maybe it's eye and tissue. So you can find out more about that. One thing that when people want to make some kind of contribution in this way, but they're not able to because of the different stipulations around disease and age, often people look to someone like Upstate Medical that has an anatomical gift program. So someone might donate their body to science, basically to Upstate Medical, where they train doctors, nurses, PTs, OTs, PAs, nurse practitioners. So those are all things that you can look into. And again, many of us have maybe designated on our driver's license that we want to be an organ donor. And again, you know, your next of kin, your loved one, your healthcare proxy would be contacted if you were to, you know, have a car accident or something and end up in the hospital. They would have to approve of that organ donation for you. All right. So I'll do this one and I'll leave the hard conversations to you, Dr. Yander. I'm teasing. I'll join in. One of the other offerings that Hospicare offers, today I was doing it with our outreach nurse, clinical nurse, and we were calling it Peace of Mind Binder. And we were basically talking with people about leaving a paper trail, having it all together, maybe in a binder that gives all of the information that the loved ones you leave behind would need. For example, you see them, bank account numbers, right? Insurance policies, investment information, safety deposit keys, social security cards, birth certificates, passports. If it's, you know, and this is very interesting. We have had partners, right? Someone passes and they're like, oh my gosh, my partner paid all the utilities. I don't know the codes. I don't know how to set up the billing. I'm not sure of these things. So it applies whether people are married or partnered or not. You want to leave information so people can take care of business when someone passes. You want to have things like mortgage and deed or lease to your home or residence, any vehicle titles. And this was an interesting discussion today about account numbers and passwords. So, you know, most of us have a code, right, a password to get into both our phone and our computer. So if that's where most of our information lies, then our loved ones need to have some kind of way using our, you know, getting our passwords to get into our phones or computers, and then specific information for different accounts and passwords. And then we talked too about, you know, just having important phone numbers. Like maybe my kids don't know how to contact my Aunt Geneva, right? Who I'd want to know if something happened to me. So I might list family members for them people like lawyer, doctor, financial planner, pastor, priest, or rabbi, and also your preferred funeral home. Sometimes people in this paper trail actually leave what they would like to have for a celebration of life or a service after they're gone. So those are all things that might be in a binder or a file that you gather together. If you see that we're hosting one of these workshops, feel free to join us. If you would be interested, I could probably give you my email at the end, and I could probably email you a hard copy of kind of a checklist of these things, so you could go through and check all the things that apply to you and kind of gather them together. All right, having the conversation. Dr. Yander's always good about having difficult conversations with people. I'll let you start, then I'll chime in.
It is difficult to have conversations about the elephant in the room very often. But I always, not always, but most of the times when you actually have the conversation, there's a sensation of relief, and I'm so glad we have done this. And it's also a sensation of relief for the person that you can actually let the people know your wishes and kind of acknowledge where you are. 5 wishes is not a legally binding document, but it can provide you a structure how to talk about things that are difficult to talk about. So I think that the value is in there. Sometimes I nudge people into having a conversation with their family, saying, well, your doctor told you that you should have that conversation, so blame me, I'm the villain, and now you can have the conversation. But it may be difficult to start, but in general, there's a sensation of relief once people have been able to talk. And these are, sort of suggestions, how can you break the ice, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. During COVID, we talked about COVID as actually being a reason to talk to families about this, because people did get sick and were hospitalized and approaching death very quickly. So the other thing we often say to folks, and I really truly believe this, that having this information prepared for your loved one is a gift. Sometimes I ask family members, I say, well, does your mom or your dad, do they want to be cremated or buried? And they say, I never knew, we never talked about it, or I couldn't get them to talk about it. And I've had both the people who were leaving us and the people left behind, each of them saying, no one will talk to me about this. And so it is important that you make some decisions and that you start the conversation with some loved ones. And as earlier we were talking about how you probably don't want to do that at a wedding or a family reunion. You want to set aside some time just to do this and say, I've been thinking about some things that I really want you to know, so you can help me when I'm near the end of my life, and I want it not to be hard for you. Another person today said when their father died suddenly, they didn't know where all those documents right here were. And they ended up just having to kind of rifle through a file drawer and find them. So they would rather have just had, excuse me, them all put together in a safe place. It's like, in case of emergency, here's all the information you're going to need. It is hard having those conversations, but again, I think if you think about it as a gift, I want to help you understand what I want from you, if you're going to be my healthcare proxy or my power of attorney or make some other decisions. The other thing I want to say about 5 wishes is, in addition to kind of within it naming a healthcare proxy and having some scenarios that you would talk with your healthcare proxy about these different scenarios that might guide what kind of interventions you wanted. The other pieces of it are really about, like, if you're near the end of your life, what kinds of things do you value and treasure? It says things like, I want someone holding my hand. I want someone to give me a massage. I want people from my faith community to come and sing to me or pray for me. And some people wouldn't want that if they're not believers. And so they could cross that out, circle the things they want, cross out the things they don't want. And again, as Dr. Yander said, it's just a great tool to kind of walk through the discussion with family members or loved ones, whoever is going to be there at the end. Because once we're not able to say what we want, then we're hopeful that our healthcare proxy will know exactly what we want because we've discussed it with them, and this is a nice guide. It also, the fifth wish talks about legacy and any information you want to give your family about, you know, forgiving you or you forgiving them or letting them know that you love them. And you can also, in that fifth thing, put information about your celebration of life or what type of service you might want, including songs and readings and things like that. So it's definitely got lots of meat for conversation with your family members.
I like to remind people that by not having a conversation, these things happen by default, and they may not be the default that you want. So, by not having a conversation, it's also a choice, but it may not be the choice that you want. So if you want to have your beliefs and choices protected, it's important to let people know how you feel and what is important to you.
Great. So here's what we would suggest are great next steps for you. If you don't have a healthcare proxy form, you can go to the site that I can put in the chat here in a minute. And again, you can Google New York State healthcare proxy and it will pop up. Designate a healthcare proxy and an alternate. It's always a good idea in case something happens with the first one and they don't want to serve as that, or something prevents them from serving as your proxy. Then have two witnesses, and it could be anyone, sign it. And then again, take these copies. You should have one. Your doctors should have one. If you're at the hospital, there should be one. And the healthcare proxies themselves should have copies of them. Then, you can use the 5 wishes form, and that's something we can get to you because there are few enough of you that we could get to you. And just use that to guide some conversations to talk about your wishes with your loved ones. Again, attorney is the best person to talk about for the power of attorney, will, or living trust. And then filling out the MOLST with your physician if it's necessary. So as I was bragging about you, Dr. Yander, earlier, saying that Dr. Yander talks about this with her patients at least once a year, and it is really important. And, these are things you can bring up with your doctor if they don't bring them up with you, talking about your needs. All right, so any questions that you think the general population would benefit from? You can ask those now. I guess just unmute and ask us. Actually, I think I can end the screen sharing so we can all see each other. Okay, I did it, my first time.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions?
Are you still recording, Bert?
Yeah, I'm still
Okay, so you
recording.
have general questions that you think anyone who's watching this recording might say, okay, I'm wondering about that thing.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So as far as like what was it? The MOLST form. Let's say, so where my mind goes is, okay, I would like to be, right now my health is good. And if I were to be in a situation where I needed to be resuscitated, I would like that. However, then my mind goes, okay, well, my mind wanders to how many days is one on life-sustaining support before we know that it's time to make a decision. Have your proxy make a decision and not continue this. Where does one gather that kind of data to? Because I just realized as I was listening, like that's where I'm stopped. I'm like, I don't even know where to begin with that kind of to find that and to make how to make an informed decision about such a thing.
It's a very good question, so Where would you get that guidance is your medical team at the time where you are. So let's say you are in some horrific car accident, you have a brain injury, and you're in the ICU, intubated, all kinds of complications. And if you can't speak for yourself, your healthcare proxy will be making decisions. If you haven't identified a healthcare proxy, it's going to be a surrogate based on the New York State family law. And the team will be talking to them. And some of these decisions can be very nuanced. I like the concept of therapeutic trials. This person has a serious brain injury. Let's wait a week, see if the brain swelling gets better, see if we treat his aspiration pneumonia, we treat his bleeding, we treat his fractures, we'll see where we settle down. And it's a decision making in progress. You know, they will be talking to your healthcare proxy if you cannot make a decision. When do you absolutely determine that things have kind of moved beyond hopeless? You know, if you declared brain dead, you know, there's a formal declaration, the neurologist is involved, testing is involved. But there's a period of time when things are kind of in suspense. You're being treated, and we're trying to figure out how far do we go with treatment. And that's where the good healthcare proxy comes in, because you want somebody who will be able to stay clear-headed, take in the information, and know in the back of their mind, this is what you have told them. So I tell people you cannot make a MOLST form applicable to all kinds of terrible permutations of bad things that can happen to you. I mean, it just doesn't work, you know? So really, so it's in broad strokes. What is important to your quality of life? And I have had people who tell me, if I'm in a nursing home, I don't recognize anybody. As long as I can eat ice cream, I'm good to go. I'm like, okay, fine. And then I have had people who tell me, you know, my mind is the most important thing to me. And if I lose the capacity to recognize people, to be cognizant, to be able to engage in conversations, I really do not want any life-sustaining, life-prolonging situations, you know? And again, that's where the healthcare proxy comes in if somebody's unable to make decisions on their own. So it's nuanced decision-making. It's a nuanced decision-making.
Thank you. So you make you record what is a must for you, what's non-negotiable, and then the healthcare proxy is there to navigate the unforeseen circumstances.
That's correct. And I tell people, you know, in broad strokes, like tell your healthcare proxy what is important to you. And the goalposts sometimes move as people get sicker. I have had people in the beginning of, you know, some serious illness tell me, oh, if I ever get to that point, I'm done, just don't do anything. And then we get to that point and they're like, you know, I want to see my grandkid graduate from high school. Like I will agree to X, Y, and Z. And it's a series of, it's a living kind of conversation, you know, many times.
That is, no, go ahead, please. You were going to say more. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to have ongoing series of conversations, you know, within your family and with your healthcare proxy and with your doctors. And, you know, I have seen people change their minds and the goalposts have changed. And what it is interesting, you know, there was a study of people with spinal cord injury, you know, people who get a bike accident and develop a spinal cord injury. And when you talk to them a month after, everybody's like, my quality of life's terrible, totally depressed, terrible, terrible. If you talk to people a year later, they've kind of adjusted to the new reality of wheelchair and bowel regimen and personal care attendants. And they're like, yeah, okay, a new level. So it's important to keep that in mind, you know, to solicit where people are, what they want, and the trajectory of the illness. And vice versa, you know, we have seen people who go through many rounds of chemotherapy and tolerate all kinds of side effects that are very difficult to tolerate. And then, you know, sometimes there's family expectation. Oh, you just have to keep going. You have to keep going. And sometimes people say, I'm done. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too hard. You know?
Yeah.
So I think having the conversation, like, where are you? What are your physical, emotional, social resources? How far do you want to take things?
All right, I've got 30 now. Thank you. And go ahead, Edna.
Oh, I was just going to say, again, these are all dynamic decisions, right? They change over time. And, you know, an example of someone on hospice is sometimes they'll say, I want to die in my home. let me die in my home. And then when they see how difficult it is for their loved one to care for them, they're like, oh, okay, that's not so important to me anymore. You know, they change their mind. They're like, no, I need to go someplace where someone else can care for me because I don't want the strain on my family. And sometimes family members make that decision, right? They're the healthcare proxy, and they're like, I really wanted to honor this wish, but we can't do this anymore, and do it safely and do it well. So, you know, people do change their mind, and that's okay. But I think, you know, that's why you choose someone who kind of understands the spirit and the broad strokes, as Dr. Yander says, of what you want. And then you just trust that they're going to be able to follow that broad guideline to make decisions for you when you can't.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Other questions that are more general? If it were a larger group and to be more anonymous, I'd be like, okay, put in the chat if you have your healthcare proxy done and on your fridge, if you've done your will, if you have your POA set up. They're easy things to think, oh, I'm going to do that later. And again, we want to have them ready for when we need them, because we don't know when we will.
Yeah.
I think the healthcare proxy is really important because that is important even for younger people, and especially if people have, you know, sort of non-traditional family structures, because sometimes the default could be your brother and they may not agree with your lifestyle choices, and you don't see with them eye to eye, and these people could be, or the people are kind of socially incapacitated, you know, substance use disorder, severe mental health issues, and they could become the default healthcare proxies. So you really want to make sure that, especially if you in sort of unusual family structure, make sure you have good healthcare proxy. Your healthcare proxy doesn't have to be local. You know, sometimes that's the question. Oh, I don't have anybody here. Well, I mean, it's a phone call away. I mean, they could be living in Virginia, Washington State. It doesn't matter, as long as it's somebody who knows you well, is able to carry out sometimes difficult decisions, and doesn't sort of buckle under pressure, you know, is capable of processing information, having complicated dialogue with the healthcare team, kind of understanding where things are. It doesn't have to be a healthcare professional, obviously, but it should be somebody who's sort of like grounded and you can trust, because you're really putting a lot of trust into your healthcare proxy.
Yeah.
And vice versa, the healthcare proxy occasionally, and they sometimes have to, you know, I have had situations when somebody agreed to be a healthcare proxy for a friend, and it was kind of like, you know, we're in their 50s, not to know what can happen. And then somebody ended up having a brain tumor. And it was a journey of 18 months of intense decision-making and really intense time involvement, emotional involvement. So, you know, you pick somebody who can stand by you, you know?
Yeah, that's the thought that came to mind for me was that you find someone, you may want to think about that side as well. Like, you know, find the person who's really going to be able to go through with you, should that be the case.
Yeah. And sometimes people change healthcare proxies just because of these reasons, you know, that if there's a lot of intense decision making along the way, yeah. You want somebody who has the bandwidth in their life, you know, like if you have somebody who's raising young kids and having a full-time job, and are they going to be able to go to the doctor's appointment and this and that, you know?
I was going to say, I've seen several people designate a friend, no relation, no familial connection, and the friends have been fabulous healthcare proxies for them. Yeah, it's really been beautiful to see people step up and do that for others. Yeah. And sometimes people say, well, who should I ask if I don't have a family member, or I don't have kids, or I don't have a close friend? And sometimes I suggest people who have been like long-term neighbors or long-term members of a faith community. You know, you can kind of think outside the box if nobody just comes to mind as a potential person.
Yeah. So if you really don't have anybody and you kind of exhausted the New York State family law surrogacy, you get assigned a healthcare proxy. You know, it's a lawyer assigned by the state. And I mean, these people are very well-meaning people, and they really try to do a good job. The problem that I foresee is they don't have any relationship to you. And a lot of the decisions that have to make by default. So the New York State, you know, protects life. So, you know, unless you in some dire straits, like you're supposed to be resuscitated, you're supposed to get a feeding tube, you know, so the default is relatively aggressive. You know? And so the lawyers can go to court and petition a court to sort of de-escalate treatment, and sometimes they do, but you know, once something gets to the kind of judicial review, everything takes so much longer, and you know, you may be lingering in some acute chronic hospital, you know, on event while things are kind of getting sorted out. So I tell people it's better if you pick a healthcare proxy and things don't just happen by default.
Definitely.
Well, thank you both so much. It's been really valuable.
Would you want to stop recording and just see if anyone else has any questions before we sign off?
Yeah,
that
sure.
make-
Absolutely. So thank you all.
Yeah.